Mr. President, honourable members, honoured guests, ladies and gentlemen. Well, it doesn't seem like 21 years ago since I last stood here in this debating chamber, when I was Treasurer and I sat in that chair. Now, Mr. Treasurer, I realise that there is no sponsor for tonight's debate, and I'm really not sure what that says about modern politics. I think that probably we all need to go away and examine whether actually there is anybody who wanted to sponsor tonight's debate. But can I congratulate you, Mr. President, on tonight's debate, on this being your first debate on your election, and wish you all the very best for the term ahead, which I'm sure is going to be a tremendous success. And let me just say, seriously, ladies and gentlemen, to all of you here, as Sir Alan said this evening, for me personally, the Oxford Union was one of the best investments I ever made in my future. I didn't know what the Oxford Union was when I arrived here, but I came my first weekend and I phoned my father up and I said, Dad, you have to send me £80 because I have to join this amazing institution that I have just discovered. And I did, and it was absolutely fantastic. So let me say to those of you who are thinking about it, please do make that investment. Now, Mr. Secretary, you talked about there being Cameron's concoction in the bar this evening. Well, can I make a suggestion that as Halloween is approaching, you might think about having Ed's Evil Brew in a few weeks' time? Now, it falls on me, as it did on the Honourable Member for Balliol, to sum up tonight's debate. And at the end, I shall ask you to oppose this motion. We began with the Honourable Member from Somerville. Now, I'm not sure if he is a lawyer by training, but perhaps if not, he might think about it. Because I have to say, I think the way that he picked holes in the wording of the motion was truly a legal thing to behold. And I congratulate him on that. But he was absolutely right to ask, what is the purpose of a government? And the purpose of a government is not only to keep people safe in this country, but it is also to govern for everybody and fairness to all. And I shall come on to talk about that. It has to be fairness to everybody in this country, not just a few. And that means, as Sir Alan talked about, the last Labour government, like all Labour governments, runs out of money. But it doesn't run out of its money, because government doesn't have any money. It runs out of your money because you're taxpayers, and it's your money and your hard-earned taxes that you pay, or that you will pay, that government is spending. And never, ever forget that, because governments should never, ever forget that. Now, the Honourable Member also talked about this being a coalition government. And he's absolutely right. I would much rather have this be a majority Conservative government. That's what I was campaigning for. That's what Alok was campaigning for in the run to the 2010 election. But that's not what we got. We got a coalition government. And let me tell him and our other speakers here this evening that actually, even now, in the run-up to the end of the dissolution of Parliament, this government is working extremely well on a day-to-day basis. I sit around the cabinet table, I work with the Liberal Democrat minister in my department, and actually this government is working extremely well for the benefit of everybody in this country. So please don't make the mistake of believing everything that you read in the newspapers, and certainly don't make the mistake of believing that what people say in terms of political statements from conference platforms really typifies the way the government is working, because it is working extremely well on a day-to-day basis. Now, Sir Alan talked about international aid, and I have to say I think that is something that this government should be truly proud of having delivered, that 0.7% commitment in terms of what we're going to spend on international aid. And the point is, as he said, Britain is now in a position to be able to help in some of the poorest people in our world. We are the second largest donor of bilateral aid to those who are in Syria and those who are seeking refuge from the fighting that is going on in Syria and Iraq. And we can only do that because we have put our economy back on a sound footing. If we did not do that, we would not be able to pay for the NHS or for our schools or for international aid. So you should have confidence in this government, because we have got the economy back in a much healthier state. There is still more work to do, but it is much better than it was in 2010 and enables us to make contributions to things like the international aid budget. Now, the Right Honourable Member, my opponent perhaps, or my foe in the House of Commons at times, talked about leadership confidence in the Prime Minister. Well, I have to say, as there was in other things that he said I'll come on to, there was a certain whiff of hypocrisy about that, because it's not the Prime Minister that is under threat as a leader of his party. It is the leader of the Labour Party. And if he wants to know about that, he ought to look at some of the text messages that emanated from the Labour parliamentary meeting on Monday evening. One to a journalist that simply said, after he'd listened to Ed Miliband, "Not good enough." There is no leadership confidence or problems in the Conservative Party. There is certainly in the Labour Party. And the point about the economic crisis that we inherited in 2010 was not that the Labour Party caused the world economic crisis. I would like to attribute that to them, but I think I may be going just a little bit too far. But what they did was they didn't pay off the debt when the going was good. When this country was in a boom situation in the early 2000s, the last time the government was in balance was in 2002. That took another 8 years in which Gordon Brown continued to spend more every year than he was raising in taxes. We wouldn't do that. Yes, of course.
Are you aware that the Conservatives plan to match Labour spending plans pretty much all throughout that period?
Let me say to the honourable member that the Labour opposition try that tack in the House of Commons. And I have to say, that is truly, I'm afraid, pathetic to say that it wasn't our fault. You didn't tell us that we were spending too much money. They were in government. Like we're in government, we take the consequences of our actions. They were in government. They carried on spending more than they were raising in taxes. That is not a responsible way to run your economy. Now, the right honourable member also talked about the spare room subsidy and he talked about the 50p tax rate. We've heard on the 50p tax rate again, but of course what he didn't say was that over 13 years they never had that high a tax rate. That tax rate went up 1 month before the 2010 general election and was purely put up as a political stunt to see whether the Conservatives or a coalition government would put it down. And in relation to the spare room subsidy, we could probably talk about that as a whole separate debate, but all I would point out is the last Labour government cut that subsidy for the private rented sector. They made that first change on that, and then this government had to make some difficult decisions, and extending it to the social rented sector was one of the decisions that we had to take. Now, my honourable friend talked about his family and this party being a party, the Conservative Party, and this country offering hope and aspiration to families. And that's something we should be proud of, and you can have confidence in this government because hope and aspiration are at the heart of what we are here to do. He talked about the economic achievements of this government. Now, let me congratulate all of the floor speakers. I started my union career as a floor speaker. So to those who hadn't spoken before tonight, you were all absolutely excellent. Doesn't mean I agreed with everything that you said, but I think just getting up here and speaking is a huge thing to do. So congratulations. The first speaker talked about the realities of coalition government. We're getting used to having a coalition government in this country. I sincerely hope we don't have one after May next year. As I say, I want there to be a majority Conservative government. But coalition government is different from having one party in government. And I think the last speaker said that he liked coalition government. So there we are, Mr. President. Maybe that's another topic for debate. Does this country like coalition governments or doesn't it? Now, the other gentleman here talked about it not being very sexy to be a Tory. Well, gee, thanks very much. I think he was trying to be helpful, but you know that was great. Thank you very much, sir. The gentleman here talked about the credit rating. I couldn't work out whether he was talking about S&P or SNP. If it was SNP, then yes, I would agree. They might think that Ed Miliband would be good for the credit rating. If it's the SNP, then I have to say I think I would take issue with that. One of the speakers talked about the dispatch boxes. I have to say these dispatch boxes are in a much better state than those in the House of Commons. And finally, the librarian, it was a delight to hear you speaking, but I have to say I wasn't entirely sure by the end whether you actually wanted there to be any sort of government if you didn't like the one that you've got. The Honourable Lady, in summing up for the proposition, made a brilliant speech. She started off saying she was going to issue an apology. The apology I hoped for was going to be an apology for the state the economy was left in by the last Labour government. Sadly, I didn't get that, but never mind. I mean, you know, we can't have it all. And she talked about structural unemployment. Well, the structural thing is the deficit, as we've already heard. Now, one of the things that I must take issue with her about, and it is one of the things I think that I do try to say when I'm speaking to different audiences, is that all members of Parliament are here to represent everybody in their constituencies. And to be fair, right across the House, regardless of party, pretty well every member of Parliament I know does that. They work incredibly hard all the time, most sincerely, for everybody in their constituency. So please don't everybody say that members of Parliament are out of touch or don't know what's going on amongst everybody in their constituencies, because frankly, those of us, and I think everyone's doing it, does the job well, holds their surgeries, has thousands and thousands of cases, will do that. Now, Mr. President, let me just very briefly towards the end, why should you have confidence in this government? I am obviously the Secretary of State for Education, so let me just talk very briefly about education, because we have invested in future generations. We have reformed the curriculum. So that instead of dumbing down, it ensures that everybody is getting good grades that can be relied upon. We have invested in schemes like Teach First and Teaching Leaders to make sure we have the best and the most highly qualified teachers in this country. We've introduced the Pupil Premium, something both sides of the coalition had in their manifestos to ensure the most disadvantaged people get extra funding and support. And we've given schools more freedom. We trust heads and teachers to deliver the best education in this country. We now have, if there's no other reason for you to support this side of the House tonight, we now have more good and outstanding schools in this country than we had in 2010. The contrast to the last government is stark. 1 in 3 primary school pupils are leaving primary education unable to read and write. Ladies and gentlemen, this government's record is a record of achievement. It's a record of standing up for the most vulnerable in our society, making daily life affordable again because of the income tax threshold increases, protecting and supporting hard-working taxpayers. But most of all, our record is one of investing in the next generation through our education system, making sure they have jobs to go to, making sure that apprenticeships are of high quality, and making sure that everyone is able to own their own home when they get there. This is about making sure that every person in this country can realise every ounce of their potential, and for that reason I would ask you to oppose the motion and have confidence in this government.